Geopolitical risk right now is probably at the highest level. In fact, higher than any time I can remember for the last 20, 30 years. The risk of a direct war between Israel and Iran, the two arch rivals in the region, is very, very high. If a war were to basically break out, I think oil is going to go to 100. I think Trump is going to win. U.S. stock market is going to do very well on a Trump victory. But you have all these risks right now that are going up closer we get to the election.
Hi, and welcome to Wealthion. I'm James Conner. If you are like me, you have a lot of questions about the global economy, the U.S. elections, and also geopolitics. And I'm trying to figure it all out to reposition my portfolio for potential volatility, especially if things heat up in the Middle East. To help make sense of all this, my guest today is David Wu. And David is a former Wall Street macro strategist, and now he's out on his own. So he's no longer constrained by the shackles of Wall Street politics. So he doesn't hold back. And this is one of the reasons why I always enjoy speaking with David. David, thank you very much for joining us today. We have a lot to discuss on the global economy and U.S. elections, but because you're based in Israel, this is where I want to begin. And tensions continue to rise between Israel and Iran. And I want to get your current assessment on what's happening there and what's going to happen in the coming weeks and months.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me. As you said, I'm in Israel. And all I can tell you is, from my standpoint, I think, if you think about geopolitical risk in the Middle East over the past year, since, the attack on Israel on October 7th, I would say geopolitical risk right now is probably at the highest level. In fact, higher than any time I can remember for the last 20, 30 years. And what I mean by very high is that, the risk of a direct war between Israel and Iran, the two arch rivals in the region, is very, very high. I don't think it's been higher, I think, in my lifetime in any event. And I think from that point of view, if over the past year, the market had been concerned about a regional war, okay? The market didn't really care about the Israel-Gaza war. People got killed, but the market didn't really care. And nor did it care about the Ukraine war, as long as the Russians and the Ukrainians were bogged down. The market wasn't worried that it was going to have spillover effect, much like basically the Gaza war. But Israel and Iran is a very different story, obviously, because Iran being, a major oil exporter. And so from that point of view, and Israel obviously goes out saying it's very important in tech and so on and so forth, in terms of U.S. basically presence in the Middle East. But I think in general, there is no doubt, I think all people need to know is this, which is that Israel is going to retaliate after the strike against Israel 2 weeks ago now, basically by Iran. I can still tell you that it was a pretty scary moment. I was hiding in I've got a nuclear shelter here in my house with my dogs who were completely traumatized because the explosions were really, really very loud. I'm talking about explosions of the Israeli anti-missile system basically taking down those Iranian incoming missiles. But the point here is this. All you need to basically know is that Israel will strike back, probably will be very soon. Soon meaning that in days as opposed to in weeks. And I would say most importantly, there's a very good chance I think Israel is going to strike at Iran's nuclear capabilities. And I think this is very important because there are two questions that I think people are interested right now. One is basically what exactly Israel is going to hit. And two, what is Iran going to do afterwards? Okay. Now, first of all, I think on the question of what Israel is going to hit, there's been a lot of speculation. Is Israel going to is Israel going to hit Iran's oil fields? I think that's going to be the last thing on Israel's basically agenda. Because first of all, oil fields, you could basically blow them up, but they could be repaired actually, and they'll be up and going again after 3 months. So you can only bring about temporary disruption if you were to target oil fields. And then at the same time, of course, if Israel were to take out Iranian oil fields, forget about what it means for oil price immediately. Most likely, Iran will retaliate by basically attacking the oil fields of Israeli allies in the Gulf, meaning UAE, maybe even Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth. And I think from that point of view, the last thing Israel wants to do is to basically put its allies, in the Gulf in an awkward position. So I think that's the first thing. I don't think oil, as much as I do think that there could be secondary impact on oil price, I don't think the effect is going to be on the first order to the extent I think Israel, if they can somehow not basically touch the oil fields, I think they will go out of their way to basically avoid it. Now, of course, the real question is, will Israel try to go after Iran's nuclear program? I think that is obviously, the most important question everybody's asking, right? Let's put it this way. As you probably might have heard, last week there was an earthquake in Iran that was recorded as a 4.5 Richter scale earthquake, and it was 10 kilometers deep, and it was very close to a nuclear reactor, okay? And so a lot of experts have been sort of speculating whether that was a nuclear test, okay? Now, again, let's just say it's 50-50, okay, it was a nuclear test or not. But we do know, even from Anthony Blinken, who is, I don't know if he's an authority on this issue, but certainly he is very pro-Iran. So I think from that point of view, if he says so, I'm going to take it as a given. Even he admitted recently that Iran is only 1 to 2 weeks away from basically getting a bomb. Getting a bomb meaning, let's be very precise about this, Iran has enriched a lot of basically 60% purity uranium, okay? Enough for them to make 5 bombs if they were to go to 99%. And what Anthony Blinken means by 1 to 2 weeks is that if Iran tomorrow were to decide to go for the purity, 99%, guess what? It will take them about a couple of weeks to basically move from 60% to 99% in order to make enough, basically to make enough material to make at least 1 bomb, okay? So Iran is either already in the nuclear threshold or has already crossed it. We don't know. We also know basically that in the last basically few months, Iran has successfully tested nuclear bomb detonators, okay? At the same time, we know as a fact that Iran now has very good ballistic missiles. I mean, the ones that they shot at Israel, 2 weeks ago, they were called basically the Fatah 110 missiles. These things actually have a range of about 300 kilometers. They can carry, essentially up to half a ton of weight, which was a lot of explosives. And on top of that, most importantly, they're equipped with precision guidance, okay? So basically, Iran already has the delivery mechanism, they've got the detonators, and they're just a couple of weeks from basically crossing the nuclear threshold if they haven't done so already. Like, no sane country at this point will say, you know what, let's just leave it alone. Let's wait, let's sit on our hands for another couple of more years and see what happens. Israel has no choice because at this moment, this is existential. Okay, so I think from that point of view, whether Israel has the capabilities or not, I think everything they're going to be doing, I think is going to be trying to slow down Iran's nuclear capabilities development. I think what they can. Now, of course, I think they're probably going to hit the infrastructure of the Revolutionary Guards because, the regime in Tehran is propped up only by the Revolutionary Guards who are widely hated across the country. So I think from that point of view, like Israel is definitely going to go after the military infrastructure, the missile sites, the launchers, the airplanes, they don't have much of an air force, but the tanks, the training center, the whole shebang, okay? So I think it's going to be something like that. Now, I think obviously the question is like, where does the US come into this, okay? Now, the only thing we know is this. Who knows? I mean, there's a lot of, smoke and error and this kind of thing. But I think, I do trust, okay, media reports that claim that, Israel has not so far shared its plan with the US. Okay. That makes sense to me at many different levels, but let's just take that as a given right now, that Israel has not yet shared its plan with the US. What does that mean, you might say? To me, the fact that Israel has not shared its plan with the US means, number one, that more likely than not, Israel is going to do something bigger than what the US will basically, Biden will allow. Okay? So from that point of view, like that's one reason not to share with the US if you think that US is going to try to hold you back. So therefore, you don't even tell the US, you just go and do it. Okay? The second thing I think we can assume, if Israel indeed hasn't shared its plan with the US, is that Israel plans to do this by itself. And it has the capabilities to go do it by itself. Now, again, Israel has been preparing for this for the last 20 years. I'm going to assume that Israelis have the abilities. They know what they can or cannot do. the constraint, and so on and so forth. So I think from that point of view, this is going to be a very important thing. And by the way, as far as the U.S. is concerned, and this is where we can bring in the U.S. election to some extent, which is that everybody knows, okay, that if Israel and Iran were to go to war, okay, that this will probably help boost Trump, okay, in the election, right? Because, if you look at various different polls, the feeling is that I think, that most voters feel that, Trump actually, will be better for the U.S. in terms of foreign policy than Kamala Harris. So any sort of, sudden escalation in terms of geopolitical conflict, a war between Israel and Iran, it's going to be like front page news. It's going to be like, literally every day. That's all you're going to be reading about it. That sort of thing, I think, which will signal failure of U.S. policy towards Iran over the last, 4 years under Biden, there's no doubt that's going to benefit Trump. And to the extent I think Jerusalem does not want to be viewed as trying to influence the U.S. election by, by attacking Iran, I think you're going to have to assume that Bibi Netanyahu will probably want to get this thing done sooner rather than later. Sooner meaning the next, basically, week, 10 days, as opposed to getting too close to the U.S. election. Because if Israel were to attack, let's just say a week before the U.S. election, there will be a lot of people saying, oh, wow, Israel was interfering with the U.S. election, that so on and so forth. I don't think Israel needs to hit Iran, not because of the U.S. election. Israel needs to hit Iran because it's an existential threat. So I think from that point of view, I think that this is going to happen sooner rather than later.
Why not wait until after the election?
I think after the election, there are a couple of problems. Okay. First of all, I don't know if a lot of your viewers remember this or were not, but whether you like Israel, you don't like Israel, we're not talking about whether you like, you don't like. We're just looking at the facts. We're just trying to understand the reaction functions of the players around the table so that we can actually make good predictions. Now, I still remember, the year that Obama stepped down, okay, from office, after the election and up to the inauguration of Trump, that was what was called the lame duck session, right? I mean, the lame duck session is, again, between the election day and the inauguration day, okay, of the next president. Now, Obama decided to basically, do something quite nasty, about Israel. Like, during the election, he didn't do anything to Israel. But after the election, after Trump had already won, there was nothing else to basically that he could do that was going to hurt Hillary Clinton. So he just basically went after Israel in a pretty big way. We don't have to go into it. But I think right now the fear, okay, I think in Israel, and it certainly would be my fear, is what Biden and Harris can potentially do to Israel during that lame duck session. Okay, especially if Trump basically doesn't win, for example. Okay, so I think from that point of view, again, if you are the prime minister of Israel, all you want to do is to do what is good for your people, your country, and so on and so forth. You don't want to be out there taking risk about who's going to win, who's going to lose in the U.S. election. Because if Kamala Harris were to basically win, it will make it very difficult, I think, for Israel to attack Iran. Okay, so I think from that point of view, and then that's just the nature of the thing, because the election is over by then. Then if a Democratic president or basically a VP or outgoing president decide to basically who knows, if Israeli planes take off in the sky on their way to Iran, U.S. airplanes go up in the air to stop them. You have no idea if that cannot happen. I can guarantee you it won't happen ahead of the U.S. election because, American people are generally quite pro-Israel. I mean, that will be seen as being very bad, for Kamala Harris if Biden were to do something like this. But after the election and before the inauguration, be a very different story. So I think I would think that Israel has the understanding about this aspect of American politics to not want to take that risk and get it done before the election.
And I just want to clarify, you don't think it's going to be one or two targets. You think it's going to be multiple targets throughout the country. And in other words, there's going to be a massive attack.
I think it will be a pretty massive attack. I just don't see how Israel can basically like do this without this being a massive attack. And by the way, it's not going to be over in one day. It's definitely not going to be. It's going to be ongoing for many, many days, and then Israel probably will take very high casualties as well. So, for example, just last night we had a drone attack, okay, launched by Hezbollah in Lebanon. Okay, 2 drones basically were launched, and one of them basically made it into Israel because these drones, which are Iranian drones with Russian technology, can fly very, very low under detection of radar. And they basically attack the canteen of a major military base. And then, tens of soldiers were injured, some of them very seriously, and then a few got killed. So, that was just one drone. I mean, Iran, has thousands and thousands and thousands of drones, which they're supplying to basically Russia. So, I mean, this is not going to be, that's what I'm saying to you, that this is not going to be sort of one of these things, because what the market's been used to over the past year is like, well, Israel hits Iran, Iran hits back 3 weeks later, and then Israel hit, it's not going to be one of those things. It's going to get very ugly very quickly. So it's not going to be this kind of like, the market won't be given any time to breathe, to think about this. It's just going to go crazy, and then you're just going to see a lot of news coming through. And then maybe it's in that atmosphere, rightly or wrongly, whether Israel hits the oil fields, don't hit the oil fields, oil prices basically go through the roof.
And if this does escalate, is there a threat of other countries entering the war?
At this point, I think not. And I'll tell you why. Obviously, the first country, obviously this would be bad news if Russia were to enter the war, right? I mean, it goes without saying. But let's remember, Russia recently signed a defense treaty with North Korea, which means that if North Korea were to come under attack, Russia now has an obligation to come to North Korea's basically rescue. Obviously, Iran would love to basically sign such an agreement with Russia. But so far, the Russians, I don't know where Russia really stands on this. The fact that they haven't signed it tells me that maybe the Russians are not exactly enthusiastic about signing such a defense treaty, because it will certainly put it at war with Israel over Iran, and most likely with the US, which also would mean that let's just assume that, Russia would like to see Trump win the election, because then we're probably going to see a sooner end to the Ukraine war. So I think from that point of view, this Russia want to basically make Donald Trump an enemy, okay, before he's even reelected, by basically signing a defense treaty with Iran, and I probably think not. So my view is, this is another reason why the possibility that Russia could take that step and sign a defense treaty with Iran is another reason why Israel has to basically move before such a treaty is signed. But for the time being, I think the chance of that happening, Russia signing a defense treaty with Iran, is not that high. Especially given the fact, I think, Putin and Bibi Netanyahu have a decent relationship. And then moreover, over the last 10 years, Russia has generally turned a blind eye when Israel chooses to attack Iranian bases inside Syria. Okay. And I think from that point of view, there's an understanding there. Okay. And at the same time, now you say, well, what about China? Will China get involved? I think that's the last thing China is going to want to do, is to get it directly involved with this basically war. Now, it's true that 15% of its oil comes from Iran, and then it buys this oil very cheaply. But you know what? I don't think that is worth going to war, with the US over, because that will certainly, again, for Russia and China to enter this war between Israel and Iran will certainly force the US to take the other side, to stand behind Israel even more, which basically brings you much closer to World War III, which I think all sides want to avoid. So again, this is, right now, I don't see other countries getting involved. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about, so which country is Israel going to fly over on its way to Iran, right? Would it fly through Saudi Arabia, because that would be a fairly direct route? I think the way I think about this is, I don't know. But what I do know is that Israel doesn't have to fly through Saudi Arabia. Israel can fly through Syria. Excuse me. Israel can fly through either Syria or Iraq. I mean, Iraq doesn't have much of an air force. So Israeli planes, stealth planes, which fly very high, can cross into Iran from Iraq without having to worry about being shot at by the Iraqis.
So let's talk about oil and the impact of what this is going to do to the oil price. Oil's been trading in between this tight range all year, 70 to 80 bucks, and I'm surprised it's at this level given on what's happening in the Middle East. But what's your thoughts on oil here, and where could it go if things do escalate between Israel and Iran?
I think first of all, I don't think you could look at $60, $70, $80. Oil's fair value changes, and so it doesn't have a particular fixed fair value. I mean, let me tell you this: if it weren't for this current bout of geopolitical risk in the Middle East, oil probably trading at 60 right now. And then the reason is very simple, by the way. I mean, and I think I think there's something we need to understand, which is the fundamental demand and supply picture of oil. Now, as you know, like Chinese oil imports have been down now, 4 or 5 months in a row. I mean, that is a major drag on oil price because remember, non-OPEC production, even though OPEC production has been flat this year because they've been holding back, like non-OPEC production continues to go up, right? We're talking about even Brazil, US production is now up to 13.3 million barrels per day, Africa, like there's a lot of oil, okay? And then we all know that OPEC wants to increase its production. So basically, oil supply continues to grow. And demand everywhere in the world is pretty stagnant. And the expectation was that China was going to somehow basically take down the incremental increase in supply because, I mean, China is still, people are buying cars and so on and so forth. Now, but what is really going on here is actually very fascinating, which is that forget about the fact that, Chinese car sales are down basically the last 3 or 4 months, right? Because the economy has been struggling, and we can talk about the stimulus a bit later, but I think it's one big, basically nothing burger. But the point here is that Chinese car sales have been weak. But most importantly, Chinese EV sales have been surging, okay? In fact, the last couple of months was the first time that EV sales, EV including hybrid sales, okay, accounted for more than 50% of total vehicle sales. The reason, of course, is that China is providing big subsidies, okay? When you buy an EV, they'll give you like 20,000 RMB to trade in your petrol car for an EV car. So why is China doing this? The reason is very simple, because of this EV trade war between China and Europe, China and the US and so on and so forth, especially with Europe. Remember, 40% of Chinese EV exports last year went to Europe. I'm talking about Europe, I mean the European Union. There are 350 car manufacturers in China. And they have built up a lot of capacity with the idea that they're all going to be exporting a lot of EVs to Europe, which until recently had a very ambitious target in terms of carbon, basically elimination. Okay. And then now, as you know, just last week, the European Union voted, to essentially levy a 35% tariff on Chinese EV imports. Okay. And this has been going on for the last few months in terms of negotiation, which went nowhere. So Europe basically went ahead and imposed this thing. So as a result, China built up all this capacity, and then demand is not growing as fast as it would like. This is why, in order to protect the domestic EV industry, the Chinese government is basically doling out a lot of subsidies to keep these car companies going. Now, in my view, the result of this, that you're seeing surging EV sales, is that while Chinese oil imports are down 5-6% in the last 3 months, Chinese electricity consumption is up 6 or 7% the last 3 months. And that contrast is very, very important. What it's telling you is that the global war, basically the car wars, okay, between China and the rest of the world is forcing Beijing to accelerate the transition to EV within China. And that is probably undercutting demand for oil. Okay. And that to me is pretty bearish oil. Okay. That is a big story in my view. going to 2025. Because in fact, that story is such a big story that I would say that, you know what, I would take advantage of any spike in oil, essentially during an Israeli, Iran war to basically sell oil. Because that war is going to end. And when that war ends, oil price is going to collapse. Especially given my view about Trump, basically victory being inevitable, being almost a done deal at this point. Like Trump comes in, like we haven't even seen drill yet. So non-OPEC production can go through the roof next year even. So I would say that the outlook for oil is actually not good. Of course, this war is real, as I said before, and it's unpredictable. Many ways this thing is going to go. But I would say that, but if you do see a spike in oil as the result of this war in the Middle East, you want to be selling into it.
So you mentioned earlier that if we didn't have these hostilities in the Middle East, you see oil trading around $60 a barrel. But let's just assume a hypothetical. If Israel attacks Iran tomorrow, do you see oil going to $100?
I can see it going to $100. There's no doubt about that, right? And that is, by the way, in the price, because as I said before, if you look at oil volatility, implied volatility is trading at 50, OVX, right? Just think about that. VIX is now trading at 20, which seems very high. But oil vol is trading double that, right? So from that point of view, like what I'm saying is that if you want to say, well, I want to go and buy some call option on oil, that's it's the market's pricing a tremendous volatility, in terms of, that's what I'm saying, risk premium is priced in. So yeah, if that's what you think, that's what it is. So the market's pricing that already, okay? But yes, if a war were to basically break out, I think oil is going to go to 100, and I will be looking to basically sell. Once it gets to 100.
And remind me again, how important is Iran in terms of oil production?
So Iran basically produces 1.8 million barrels per day, and that has been sort of the average over the last 3 months. And the global supply is about, 85? But that's not what really matters. The point here is that, like, you cannot look at, why Iran is still not that big, but the point here is that, there's not that much spare capacity in the system. Unless OPEC decides to ramp up production to offset, which I don't know that will be necessarily, you would expect that, because they might decide, they don't have no idea how long the war is going to last, that kind of thing. So to the extent that, like US is not involved, Saudi Arabia wants to basically, so you cannot count on OPEC basically, boosting production to offset any, shortfall in the Iranian production. And also, by the way, as I said before, if OPEC tries to do that, then Iran will start to basically, fire missiles at Saudi oil fields. So that's why there is a lot of it's not as obvious as one might think, but there's no doubt, if a war were to break out, I think, oil can go to $100. And especially given that it's not going to be just like a one punch. It's a different thing if you just basically, Israel punches Iran and then Iran just sort of doesn't punch back right away and then wait basically a few weeks before punch. But I don't think that's going to be the situation. I think it's going to be like once Israel throws the next punch, I think you're just going to start to see, a real fight starting.
And then another element we got to touch on is the transportation of oil. 20% of the world's oil production is transported through the Straits of Hormuz. What do you think happens here?
No, obviously, there'll be a lot of missiles flying. I think obviously Israel is not going to be attacking, as I said, Israel has no interest in disrupting the global oil trade. So it has no interest to really get into the whole Persian Gulf thing and so on and so forth in terms of the transport. But again, the danger is that Iran decides to drag the whole region into war by firing basically missiles on, trying to create a, global havoc, and I could very well imagine Iran trying to do that.
So let's move on and talk about the U.S. elections, and I want to kind of look at it from this angle too of what's happening in the Middle East. And if Harris wins, I guess we can just assume it's going to be a continuation of Biden's policies. But if Trump wins, he's going to chart a totally different path with higher tariffs, lower taxes, and restrictions on immigration, but also big changes on what's happening in Ukraine and also the Middle East. Maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, listen, I think, I think there are going to be many differences between Trump versus Harris. Okay. I think the only, sort of ironically, the only area where I don't see too much difference is in terms of fiscal policy, ironically, only because like both will find themselves extremely fiscally constrained. The U.S. budget is at $2 trillion, right? I mean, next year, you have another $1.5 trillion of treasury bills that are going to be maturing. So gross issuance next year is going to be over $3 trillion. I mean, I don't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you still have to fund the deficits and roll over the maturing basically paper. So that's going to basically keep you very, very constrained. I would say, obviously it goes out saying the main difference between, and I think, on immigration, obviously there will be a difference. I mean, for one thing, Trump has said that he wants to carry out the biggest deportation drive in U.S. history. But as much as he talks about that, I don't know how realistic it is to actually carry out this promise, and which actually I think it's a risk to some extent, because I think the problem with this is that you're talking about like what 10 to 20 million people have gone into the U.S. illegally over the last 3.5 years under Biden. Forget about trying to deport all of them, even just to deport 100,000 of them. It will be very tough work, because you're talking about like literally sending, police or even troops into cities and trying to basically round them up and put them in camps. In order to deport them, you got to basically find a country that's willing to take them. Okay, so it's not going to be that obvious in my humble opinion, and that. So I think from that point of view, like I wonder to what extent Trump will have to be seen as doing something. Maybe he'll just start by finishing the wall. I mean, building the wall and trying to basically pass laws to basically make it more difficult, so that this whole idea of like catch and release kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. Or maybe just start basically deporting the ones with criminal records, but they're doing that already. But these people are all mixed in. You're not going to be able to find them that easily. Okay, so there are a lot of issues there. So I don't know Trump is going to be able to pull that off either. I think it's going to be a very big difference between Trump versus Kamala Harris is going to be come to foreign policy. I mean, there's no doubt. That's why, in some sense, like I think defense stocks, okay, there is a lot to be said that the outlook for defense stocks is going to be greatly determined by, essentially the election outcome. I mean, defense stocks have done very well over the last 3 years, right? Because under basically Biden, they've been just basically spending more and more and more on defense. It's been one big basically pork barrel. And I think, from that point of view, like, and this is also the reason why I don't think this defense establishment wants to see Trump return as commander-in-chief. Just think about this. There are a lot of people out there don't want to see Trump return. But I would argue the defense establishment has a particular interest to make sure Trump does not come back. Okay. In September 2020, Trump actually, 2 months before the 2020 election, Trump declared, okay, I mean, he came out publicly accusing his generals of prolonging unnecessarily the foreign conflicts the U.S. was involved in, so that their buddies at defense contractors can sell more tanks, more airplanes, and get more people killed. Believe me, these people don't want to see Trump come back, okay? And because he has said he wants to stop the Ukraine war overnight, right? I mean, which he can. All he has to do is basically pull U.S. support from Zelensky, and that's it. I mean, Zelensky's not going to be able to keep fighting, okay, if he doesn't have continued U.S. support. So I think from that point of view, I think, this is, I have no doubt that if Trump is in, I think the war in Ukraine, I mean, he says 24 hours. It might take more than 24 hours, but there's no doubt a Trump basically victory will basically, cut short the war and basically the human sacrifice that's been going on every day for the last 2.5 years, okay? That Biden has, and in the U.S., the defense establishment have been only too willing to fight to the last Ukrainian in their spat with Russia, okay? So I think from that point of view, like if Trump gets in, it's bearish for defense stocks, okay? I think for the Middle East, there's no doubt, like Trump, again, you have to realize that the alliances, right? Obama was a huge supporter of the Shiites, okay, that is Iran, and the Muslim Brotherhood, okay, which was then, the party that was in power in Egypt, and, the AK party in in Turkey is also Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. Okay, so Obama, for whatever reason, decided to ally himself with, with Iran, with Qatar, with the Muslim Brotherhood. Trump came in and decided to ally himself with the moderate Sunnis, okay, and Israel, okay. And that was the background of, basically this incredible deal that Israel signed with UAE and so on and so forth, the so-called Abraham deal that Saudi Arabia could very well sign on to if Trump were to get reelected as well. So what you're going to see is that if Trump comes in, I think, you're definitely going to see a much more, essentially, hardening of sanctions against Iran. Because remember, like Trump put in hugely, punishing sanctions against Iranian oil export. But as soon as Biden came in, he relaxed all these sanctions. Okay. In practice, he unfroze billions of dollars of Iranian money. It's true, it's Iranian money, but they were frozen because Iran was under sanction. Okay. So Biden basically released, essentially unfroze billions of dollars and released that money to Iran. At the same time, Biden turned a blind eye to Iranian oil export. It just simply stopped enforcing U.S., essentially sanctions on Iranian oil export. That's why Iranian oil export went from 200,000 barrels per day 2.5 years ago to now 1.8 million barrels a day. As a result, Iran today has an extra, $60 billion more than they would have had under Trump. And by the way, this is actually very interesting because Iran also knows, okay, that if Trump were to get reelected, this will be a disaster for Iran. Okay. This is why, the Trump campaign issued a statement 2 weeks ago saying that Trump had been briefed by U.S. intelligence, basically agencies about an assassination attempt, basically being planned by Iran against him, by the way. So, there are a lot of people who want to see Trump dead. We talked about some of the suspects here, but Iran is definitely one of them as well. There's also Ukrainians, by the way. So from that point of view, so what this is all leads us is that I think if Trump were to come in, you will see, Iran under sanctions once again. And I think Iran, if they became really convinced that Trump is going to return as president, then Iran probably has a huge incentive to make a run for nuclear immunity. Right? Because that was the whole point. Because once you have nuclear immunity, you're like North Korea. Nobody can touch you anymore. That was the whole thing. The Iranians really do believe that the reason, now I'm not talking about the Iranian people, because the Iranian people is a very different thing than the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime, the clerical regime, these mullahs, they really believe that nuclear weapons is the best thing to protect, okay, their regime, their religious, radical, ideological Islamic regime. Okay? So from that point of view, they might decide to run for nuclear immunity if they think Trump is going to win. And then that actually, ironically, makes it more likely that Israel will have to basically attack them before the election. So from that, and I think, to some extent, you could argue that, for a while, the Iranians were probably, were basically take a wait and see attitude. They want to see how likely Trump was going to get reelected. Right. And then when, Kamala Harris was surging in the poll, like they were probably getting told by Anthony Blinken, you guys better lie low right now because like if you do anything, it's only going to help Trump. And then if things continue, like you're going to be in great shape. So when Iran decided to strike at Israel 2 weeks ago, I suspect they might have been partially influenced, okay, by the fact that the data now suggests very clearly that Kamala Harris' momentum has run out, okay? And then, therefore, Iran might decide maybe there's a time to go for it, okay? Because again, if you're that close to nuclear immunity, the temptation has to be very, very strong for you to cross that basically Rubicon when you're that close. And I think that's why, in many ways, the U.S. election is basically bringing about this, geopolitical risks and U.S. political risks are starting to feed off each other in a very dangerous way. And that's why I think, the next 4 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is, I think, there are probably plenty of surprises. Obviously, that's one reason why VIX is trading way above realized vol, because I think the investors are starting to wake up to this. But that's where I've made very nice money, actually, over the last 3 weeks, which is I basically bought, October VIX contracts basically fairly early on, and I've had a very nice run up.
So let's talk about that. There's a lot of moving parts here, as you just mentioned. And the U.S. markets are currently up 20% on the year, give or take. And it just continues to climb this wall of worry. It doesn't matter what's happening in the world, in the Middle East, in Ukraine, China, wherever, the market just keeps going higher. But there's still a lot of unknowns. What are you suggesting to investors? How should they be positioning themselves going into year end and into 2025?
Yeah. Listen, I think, what I'm suggesting to investors, it depends what kind of investors you are. Okay. So for example, my main business is the institutional advisory business. And I count some of the biggest investors in the world as my clients, especially anybody who's trading in the macro space, whether they be large hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, or long only mutual funds. And for these are real professionals. I mean, these guys only care if I basically beat my benchmark. And in this case, my benchmarks, it's like any hedge fund, my benchmark is 3-month treasury bills. And therefore, I've been playing volatility, I'm short the RMB. I think, I'll be looking to sell oil if we were to get a spike. So I'm up almost 10% year to date, which is more than 500 basis points over 3-month treasury bills. So that puts me in a very, very elite company in terms of how, absolute return portfolios have done in 2024. I think for retail investors, my feeling is that if you're long stocks, I think it's worth thinking about buying some put spread. Okay. Because if you worry about this, we were just looking at this price yesterday. I mean, you could, right now, you can buy a 2 or 3 week put spread. Okay. Let's just say Iran and Israel would go at each other, or that there's another assassination attempt on Trump, or whatever. Something of that order, or that basically, or that Zelensky decides to launch a long-range missiles, basically into Russia, at a major Russian city, And these are 3 main things. I would say these are the 3 main risks. Okay. Again, Israel, Iran going at each other, Ukraine firing a long-range missiles into basically Russia and provoking, essentially a direct conflict between NATO and Russia. And 3, basically anything happen to Trump's basically safety. Okay, we've seen this movie often enough. I don't think that's something that we need to, we need to basically dance around as though it never happened. It did happen. If you recall, I actually talked about this and then before it happened. So I think from that point of view, if you worry about that kind of thing, which I think it's, it definitely, the probability is not 5%. You're talking about the combined probability of one of these 3 events happening is actually quite high. Okay. I would say you want to look to basically buy a put spread on S&P 500. If you buy a short-term put spread, let's say 3-week put spread, you want to try to structure it in such a way that you can get, let's say, a 4-to-1 payoff. That's the way I would look at this. The reason why I will argue a put spread better than just basically put is because obviously vol is very high. So if you couldn't just basically buy vol, buy it just a put, it's going to be expensive. But if you want to buy a put spread, meaning that you're selling basically you're buying the strike closer and then selling the basically the out of money basically put, you're going to get a decent payoff because it's not that expensive. That's the way one should think about this, which is this is a time for risk management. Okay. I as I said before, I think Trump is going to win. And I think, I think US stock market is going to do very well on a Trump victory. There's no doubt about that. Okay. But you have all these risks right now that are going up closer we get to the election. So from that point of view, you could decide either to take some money off the table and look to basically buy once the risks have subsided, or that you just basically do what I said. You buy some protection against your long position.
So let's dive into a little bit deeper on risk management. What are your thoughts on gold?
I think I have one very big problem with gold right now, which is the fact that I think, gold is supposed to be obviously the ultimate hedge against geopolitical risk. But gold lately have been trading with stocks, right? If you look at days stocks go up, gold goes up, stocks go up, gold goes up, and so on and so forth. So for, so the question really is, if there is going to be an attack, okay, and then what would happen to gold? Like, if stocks market were to fall, will gold all of a sudden decouple from stocks and go up? I'm not so sure. Partly because a lot of people are long gold. It's quite a crowded trade right now, even among the institutional investors. There's no doubt. Institutional investors are definitely long gold because, I mean, they may not be long gold necessarily against the US dollar. They may be long gold against the euro, against Aussie, whatever it may be, okay? And they've done very well. So what that means is that all of a sudden you have a volatility event and then people lose some money on something. And all of a sudden they're going to start to basically unwind their risk across the board. And they're going to unwind whatever they're long in, okay? And gold could get hit. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think gold is okay. I mean, gold price action is clearly okay, just like S&P price action is clearly okay, and so on and so forth. So what it's telling you is that, but what I'm telling you is that don't think that somehow like, you're long gold, like gold is going to do well when stocks go up, long gold is going to do well when stocks go down too. It doesn't quite work that way.
Well, David, that was a fascinating discussion. We touched on so many different elements. There's going to be a lot happening here in the next few weeks, that is for sure. And if somebody would like to follow you online and learn more about your views on the economy and also politics, where can they go?
Yeah, you can first of all come to visit me on my YouTube channel, David Wu Unbound. And, I put out a video every Sunday. And if you're interested in my investment strategy, then you can check out davidwuunbound.com, where I offer a retail subscription package.
Well, that's great, David. Once again, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that discussion with David Wu. As David mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world right now, and one way to hedge your portfolio against uncertainty is through gold. If you would like to learn more about gold and how it can add safety and diversification to your portfolio, visit our sister company, hardassets.alliance.com. Hard Assets Alliance is a trusted platform that's used by over 100,000 institutional and retail clients to buy and store physical gold. Once again, that's hardassets.alliance.com. There's a link below in the show notes. We're always looking for new guests on Wealthion. If you have any ideas on someone else you would like to see on the channel, let us know in the notes below. If you like this content, please subscribe to the channel, and you can check out this next video.